when I was sitting with Santiago Matumbo Hoy once, an old woman came with two little girls. This is in the Putumayo back in the 80s maybe, and you know, after lunch he would sit down in the corner of this two-room house and maybe smoke a cigarette or something, and the little girl would sit there like this, bare feet, you know, little white skirt, and he would just softly sing with this curing broom, and no big deal, no one was explaining anything to me, the gringo, and that night we talked to drinking ayahuasca, and the gringo anthropologist says, hey, what gives with these little girls? And their grandmother. And slowly the story comes out, well, their father had bought a book in the marketplace on magic, how to do magic. It's, you know, that's the white civilization, a printed book on how to do magic. The white man's magic, right? Then a few months later he went fishing early in the morning, which is the time when spirits come, early in the morning or late in the afternoon, and he started to vomit, and then he had bloody diarrhea, and then within a few days he was dead. And then a couple of months later, the mother got sick, and she died. And so the grandmother, in haste, brought these little girls and plumps them in front of the healer and says, do something for Christ's sake, you know, the equivalent of that. And, you know, and so I asked her, what do you mean? What do you have to do? And she said, well, the father died, and so he calls the mother, you know, into the land of the dead, which is not like a clear concept or anything. I'm just using it as a metaphor. And then the mother dies, and so the girls are going to be, you know, pulled in as well. So these spirits of the dead, you know, you get my point? Sort of. Well, he shouldn't have been working with the books of magic, and that's like dangerous stuff right there. But the thing that really intrigued me was what sort of love, incredible love, right, for the children and for your wife, and there's this tussle between the living and the dead. So this is really what I wanted you to be aware of, and the ambivalence that's involved in there of the spirits of the dead. And that's what I wanted to talk about in terms of that drawing as the negative sacred, what I call spewing forth, like vomiting, a swarm of spirits. And this is not just these three people sitting by the lying by the tunnel, but this is a country in which there are so many, Colombia, so many thousands of dead people, and so many stories about the atrocious way in which violence occurs. So this little list of Robert Hertz, you know, just talking in more anthropological terms about Indonesian rituals, but he says, oh, there's a certain class of deaths which cannot be dealt with. The spirits are like, you know, they can't be contained. And that's what I was thinking, what are the political, poetic, emotional implications of such trauma in a society? And I don't often read about it. When I read Amnesty International, or I read very moving accounts of Rwanda, or the society in which I live in the US, that sort of framing, that sort of way of looking at things, sometimes implicit, but not as often as I think is warranted. And that's why having a, I don't know what to call it, a more anthropological, more spiritual sense of what death can mean on a large scale is maybe helpful. Paula?
I have a question. With this book, I feel that is so important to work with this negative sacred and all this big black hole mixed with a lot of stuff, But I have this question about Bataille view. When we were in Agamben's class, if someone can help me with that, she said something about Agamben, about Bataille. He said, like, the thing with Bataille was that he arrives only with his work. He arrived to the negative part of something, but he never went beyond that. He stayed in the almost in the man without head, you know.
That's the huge achievement.
Yeah, I know. So here, in a way, it's like well, when someone says like, yes, okay, this is the trou noir or the of physics, you know, the black hole or something in where this is a negative and positive thing, where is the sacred and is all this violence content there, you know.
That's
so okay, but how could be a way to go beyond that to
it's like when someone
find
says
how to
negative.
Plier tout ça. No, it's not about positivity or negativity. You know, because I hate that position that we know a lot and that happens a lot in Colombia. In this moment, there are there is the media are talking about the murderous country we have or something like that.
Bataille,
so
there's a hand
really
in the back.
bizarre.
I mean, Bataille got a lot of fun making, and that sounds like bullshit, Nietzsche and Hegel in a standoff. So Hegel has these glorious cycles of contradictions that make almost like symphonic music of the 18th century. It's all, everything comes together, it then self-dissolves to create a bigger unity, which self-dissolves to create a bigger unity. And, you know, Marx picks it up, secularizes it. Instead of the unfolding of spirit, the world spirit, it's going to be the unfolding of capitalism, if you like, which will dissolve itself from within to produce socialism. These wonderful organic rhythms. And Bataille is putting Nietzsche up against that, is going, oh, give me a break. You know, this relationship of the fact, your belief that contradictions will produce a third point, the Aufhebung, what's it called? The thesis. Sometimes people translate it wrongly as the thesis, the antithesis, and the synthesis. So Bataille is saying, come on, where's the synthesis? And he picks even up from Hegel's famous introduction to, what's it called, the phenomenology, where Hegel talks about the space of death, or the death space, in which there's a magic that arises from being completely involved in this thing called the death space, whatever it is. And that's where Bataille sort of plunders, steals, swims in Hegel, and says, see, that's where we stop, because this notion that you'll get this happy ending, it's like a fairy tale. And he comes out with all sorts of moves, like maybe we're trying to do here. We're trying to find a drawing, we're trying to find odd ways of writing to deal with the inevitable contradictory quality of history, of reality, and so forth, as opposed to these symphonic, organic ideas in which the thesis, the antithesis, and the synthesis, which will unroll. When I was about your age, I loved that stuff, you know, because I felt that was, well, it's uplifting, and it's it seems it's a good story. And what happened between my growing up and your growing up is the shattering of so much of that with what was called post-structuralism and postmodernism, and a general sort of cynicism about large theories that do that. But that's why Bataille is sometimes called, are you ready, a proto-post-structuralist, because he's writing in the 30s. But the sort of aesthetic he's got is something that's actually developed much later with all these famous characters, Lyotard and so forth, and Derrida's love of the lot of which I admire, but I don't find all that sort of invigorating. I love some of his essays, but at a certain point I switch off. But there's a hand at the back, and it may still be relevant, this hand. Is the hand a voice?
I actually was wanting to go back to what you said before about Bataille's use of the sacred, and his writing about the sacred exemplifies this death to attraction. And I was wondering if I've read Bataille, and it's a lot like reading this. In that I don't necessarily understand what the it's hard for me to grasp, because with Bataille I find it's circular and it's provoking a lot of questions, and I see this from death to attraction, but I don't know exactly what it means.
Like what's the phrase? What's the sentence? What's the page?
No, this is something that you just said earlier in the lecture. About you were comparing this writing here, your writing here, to Bataille's death to attraction.
Well, there's a story that I heard in 71 or 72 in Ann Arbor, and I saw it printed in a book called Mimicry by Douglas, name of her, and it concerned, the story was Jackie Kennedy walks into the back of the plane carrying JFK's corpse from Dallas to Washington and finds LBJ masturbating. That's what I call the attraction of the corpse. True, of course, is irrelevant. What's interesting is the story. Is that clear? It's amazing. Not even Bataille could have. And it's actually in print. What's his name? I got that from Andrea saying that. And Andrea was wonderful because she's always great on tall stories. She always had like, that's the sort of thing. I mean, you have to sort of go and visit a morgue one day. Hang around a cemetery. So much magic is done in cemeteries. Go into the Bronx. I mean, where do you live?
Colorado.
I don't know what the equivalent would be, but I'm slightly different. I'm not talking about the corpse so much as the spirit of the dead, the graves, and so forth and so on. There's a lot of powerful magic, let's put it that way, about the dead, whether it's the actual cold corpse or whether it's a 50-year-old grave, whatever it might be. You can go up in the Bronx, I'm pretty sure, and the grave, the guys who were meant to regulate the cemetery are always on the lookout, for someone crabbing some soil or doing something with the soil of the cemetery, maybe finding an odd bone or two. Certainly, it's the case in Colombia. But I got to finish this little section, and then we go and have a cup of coffee, because I want to talk about the afterthoughts. Okay, the afterthought section. It's a shame, but I wanted to just mention the chapter 17 on criminal levy, and I made a couple of notes to myself here, which I can do in a narrative form. The first thing was the notion that Primo Levi's little book about his experiences in Auschwitz, easily the best thing written about concentration camps. Second, that it's great because it's so factual and it's dry. And later on, however, Levy in conversations with people will say, actually, now I see it contains so much art. And so you start to wonder about the relationship between art and facts. And I was intrigued so much by the fact that he begins the dry factual account with a poem, and that poem poem is in the form of a prayer or a curse, and it goes like this on page 1. Meditate that this came about. Carve its words in your heart at all times and places in the routine of the days. And then, he goes on, repeat them to your children, or may your house fall apart, may illness impede you, may your children turn their faces from you. And then you've got this so-called dry factual account, that its power of horror comes precisely because it's so unpoetic, it's so matter of fact. And when he's speaking to Philip Roth, the celebrated US novelist, he says that his model, he now thinks, was the factory report, the weekly factory report. And Primo Levi was a chemist, and that's partly why and how he survived, apart from the fact he must be very smart, and apart from the fact that he was very young. He was 20 when he was taken to Auschwitz. As a chemist, he was asked to work on the IG Farben, the world's biggest chemical corporation at the time. And they were setting up a plant to make rubber, synthetic rubber, and after that they were going to make synthetic oil. The Germans were very, very advanced in chemical industries, and as a chemist he had an easier job than other people. But he says it was the weekly factory report. And I wanted to talk about two things that are related. And one was the strange, well, I guess it's all too predictable, really, about shame. When Primo Levi talks about, in an essay written 40 years after the book Survival in Auschwitz, he talks about seeing these Russians on horseback coming. They were the first ones into Auschwitz. Coming into the camp, and they can't believe, all these corpses and these people dying with bloody diarrhea and so forth, and the disease and the corpses and so forth. And he says, when they looked at us, we could barely raise our arms or whatever, there was a look of shame on their faces. Shame. And he's very taken by that. And he says, they did not greet us, nor did they smile. They seem oppressed, not only by compassion, but by a confused restraint, which sealed their lips and bound their eyes to the funereal scene. And what I wanted to sort of say, it seems like the scene witness blocks witnessing. This happens not because of guilt on the part of the witness, claims Primo Levi, but because of a diffuse sense of shame at what they beheld. And then he goes on to remember shame in another context. And he says, it was the shame we knew so well. The shame that during the lifespan of the camp overcame the prisoners after the guards had selected those who would be marched to the death chamber. So we would look at each other. We weren't picked this time. It was the shame that the just man experiences at another's crime. The shame that the just man experiences at another's crime. The feeling of guilt that such a crime should exist, that it should have been introduced irrevocably into the world of things, and that his will for good should have proved too weak or null, and should have not availed in defence. And I wanted to bring that up for two reasons, or one reason, which is if shame is an important part in making this drawing, you see where I'm going with this? If shame is an important part of making this drawing, as opposed to guilt, or they're closely related, I would think, difficult to disentangle. How might one think of one's words or one's pictures about a situation in which you feel that type of shame? I can't answer it. I just want to put it forward as I think it's a very profound moment in thinking about the representation of horror. And if one has this type of shame, things that makes witnessing, which is I think our key question in this whole seminar, all the more awkward, all the more fascinating, all the more necessary. The second thing I wanted to bring up, and then we'll have our coffee, is that I've told you already about this story about the Fictocriticism Indians who worked the rubber in the Putumayo, and how I asked anthropologists, what did the old Fictocritics have to say about the atrocities? And the anthropologists said the old Indians would say, why do you want to know about such things? Only sorcerers use them, want to know about such stuff, because with those stories, they can kill you. They do sorcery. And I say true or false or in between, that story has weighed on me to the present, for it suggests that as regards atrocity, there is a great deal of wisdom in muteness, and not saying anything, and that to bear witness to atrocity requires particular measures and conditions that could indeed be regarded as magical. Now, Primo Levi is not one of those people who says you can't talk about Auschwitz, which is a common belief. He's totally the opposite. I mean, he wrote a damn book about it. But what the Fictocriticism story encourages me to think is that to talk about atrocity requires particular measures and conditions that could indeed be regarded as magical. And that's what I think the role of the weekly factory report was for Primo Levi. Sounds contradictory perhaps, but when he has in the background this, I'm just going to write about Auschwitz the way I had to write a report. Or today, as a manager, I write a report about the state of the factory. To me, how should I put it? We've come back to the beginning of today's class in that what might seem a fact, what might seem a dry fact, what might seem a piece of data, the weekly factory report, or like Naomi Stone's circle, handing around her notebook, is in fact a magical aid to doing what is otherwise impossible. So listen, it's been really long this morning. I mean, this is the first half. Let's go and have a cup of coffee and get back to 5:06. Ending to all of this, and you're suddenly plunged into something that is more or less directly taken from field notes, and it's about the writer of this text. It always sounds better when you call it a text. The writer of this text, namely myself, lying in a bed in a village at the end of a river. I mean, it's so metaphorical, it's so mythical, you know. And it's like a week or two after the singing this freeway thing. Lying in bed about 5:30 in the morning when people tend to get up there. It's a village with one street, cobblestones, rains all the time, a river, and lots of forest. And these were people who were basically gold miners, the descendants of slaves from West Africa, who were brought to this part of the world to mine gold for these white guys called Arboleda. And I'm lying there, and I'm in this, the writer of the text is in this situation, and it's just a blue-eyed down that the owner of the house, called Lydia Zuniga, had embroidered, and listening to the rain and hearing people walking on the cobblestones, click, 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 getting ready for work, and thinking how calm and at home I feel, having visited this village in 1971, and this is written in 2006, and I went every year in the 90s there after a long period of not being there, and suddenly realizing that there's a parallel between me lying in comfort and this picture that I drew, which I hesitate to try and draw again, but I will. Well, I don't know if I will. there's a parallel between this this image of the person sort of lying in this cocoon and the woman with this sort of needle thing, or could it be which I envisaged as sort of sewing herself into this thing. And so the whole thing of the cocoon, of enclosure, and the little boy who got up at the memorial for his parents, who'd been assassinated, but he survived by hiding in the closet. And I say in the afterthoughts that I think actually the whole text is about that little boy in the closet, and the way in which living in a closet, living in a nylon bag which has been stitched up like that, produces a sense of comfort and protection. At the same time, it's a restriction and a sort of a prison. And I went further, of course, in earlier pages, saying this is like a shroud for the dead. So there's this conflict or contradiction between feeling warm and comforted, but at the same time in a cruel world. It's a bit like Marx saying that statement that people used to love, religion is the heart of a heartless world, religion is the opium of the people, and all that sort of stuff. It gives you comfort and security in a heartless world. And I realised that this motif was really what was generating so much of what we've been talking about. I found this, and I had to leave that morning. I could only stay one night. Can you imagine going all that way and then you just have to leave the next day? And these, silly or not silly, this picture, this motif, this trope, this metaphor, became quote-unquote all-encompassing. So you go downriver in a dugout canoe, you know, everything is sort of got this sense of enclosure. And then someone reading the text, this Christopher Bracken fellow who read the text, said, you know, basically the person in this bag, I don't know how you'll react to this, you'll probably think it's like very exaggerated, is basically me. That all along, in all this 100 pages, that this is like a metaphor for the writer who's frightened, full of shame, and it's a metaphor for the heartless world, if you like, how you survive as a person and how you work as a writer in that situation. So you can take it as a small way or a very large, all-encompassing sort of way. So the question would be, was that really me all along? I think that's a pretty heavy statement because it, I mean, it's sort of absurd, you know, that I could sort of think that this was actually me. And this is where we get back to this Pieta, this virgin, sewing someone into this bag. And I think Christopher Bracken was actually absolutely correct. But it needed someone outside of the cocoon to show me that actually the writer of the text was actually writing about himself. And I wanted to then have a string of disconnected, apparently disconnected facts. The gorilla are close by in the forest. I can only stay one night. The youngest kid in his household is about 5 years old and is called Don King, which sounds like a musical gong has been struck when you say it in Spanish. Don King is the great fight promoter, right, in the US. And someone filtered into the uttermost reaches of the Colombian forest. There's this little kid called Don King, and the text goes on, his sister, Wendy Sulai, gave him this name. This morning I see him standing on the bed with a solemn face, helping his sister, Liliana, with the hooks on the back of her dress. Next paragraph. In my notebook, so it's like, now I'm giving, the notebook is asserting itself, the notebook is coming forth. Gustavo says he had a dream half a year ago that I bought him a sewing machine. It was all white, he laughs. and he talks about how the village is full of thieves, but he's the biggest thief of all. And then Doña Lucia is in my notebook too, straight out of nowhere. A presence like hers, she's a big woman. She's over 60 and she goes every day to wash gold in the river. A presence like hers is bound to make an entrance sooner or later and stand four square on the page in front of you with her mighty shoulders and a huge straw hat that blunts the rain and the sun. She's 72 actually. Her movements are exquisite as she shows me how she cures evil eye and espanto. Espanto is this fright reaction that little kids often get when they toss in their sleep, and it was described by Chris in his talk about 4 nights ago. And Lydia, the mother of the house, explained to me that kids who can't speak, 1, 2 years old or whatever, they're supposed to have the power or the ability to see the spirits of the dead, but they can't speak about it, and because they can't speak, they can see. I thought it was so fantastic, this idea. And they see the spirits of the dead, and then they have this reaction, and then you bring in a healer like Doña Lucia, and Doña Lucia shows me how it's done, and she puts one of the little kids in the house on the floor, and then she bends forward with that fantastic way the women have there, because that's how they pan for gold, and this is a West African way of standing too at this sort of work. She she measures the kid lying on the floor round the waist, and then she folds it into 2, and then she folds it into 4, and then she measures how many of these things go from the feet to the head, and then when she's finished, she then measures the waist again, and there may be a difference compared to the first time. And then she starts again with the new measurement from the head down to the thing, and that will close that difference. And then she says sort of very humbly, this is how you cure espanto, as long as it's under 4 fingers difference. Over that, forget it, see? And then she says to me, do you want the prayer? Because the procedure is done with a silent oración. And she says to me in this very matter-of-fact way, basically she says, do you want to buy the prayer? Which is, I think, pretty much how people learn the prayer. But you don't actually, how should I put it, it's a big step. I think it's not like buying an egg or something like that. I think you would think twice before you want to get involved with something like that. And I have some statement to that effect. And I say, no thanks, I back off. And then I try and draw a parallel with what I am doing. And this is actually how this little chapter ends. It says, I draw a drawing of the homeless by the freeway as a measure of control and as a way of marking. Now that word marking is very, very important, and I don't know if it's good enough. Marking, witnessing, registering, keep chasing. What is it to witness? I draw a drawing of the homeless by the freeway as a measure of control and as a way of marking what I have witnessed. Doña Lucia measures the body of the witness, this little kid, who has been traumatized by a vision of the other world, and then she uses her measuring instrument to close the body, so long as the gap is 4 fingers or less. She uses a secret prayer, which she was willing to sell. She uses a secret prayer as well. She solicits forces similar to those she wants to back off. She's using what we guess we could call magic to dispel the damaging magic. She uses secret prayer as well. She solicits forces similar to those she wants to back off. But don't we all have such a prayer? I swear I saw this. And that's where it ends. trying to draw a parallel between this, the same way as Primo Levi, if you like, uses the model of the weekly factory report to talk about the untalkable. She goes through this sequence I've just described, and I say, well, we don't do that. I don't do that. I don't go around with my belt measuring and doing that sort of thing. But I do have this expression, which I write in my diary. I swear I saw this. And the word swear, I swear I saw this, seems to me pretty obviously a magical prayer. When you say, I swear I saw this, it's an innocent enough expression. There's no big deal about it, really, right? I mean, it's a standard English expression. I don't know about French or whatever. But to swear I saw this, I swear I saw this. And whenever you're in New York or other places now, you'll hear people saying, oh my God, and they go on and on and on. It's the most common form of expression you'll probably hear in the last 10 years. So it's sort of equivalent to that. It's innocent, mindless sort of thing. But then you go back to this Wittgenstein stuff, the mythology in our language, and you sort of think maybe twice about some deeper significance of such an everyday expression. To swear is to make an oath. If you take it literally, and an oath is by and large an appeal to hidden forces that you'll come through. It's like a promise, but it's a promise not to a human being, but to an extra human being, if you like. The word swear is can be a very powerful thing to do. When you go into a court of law in the United States, in the English-speaking world, in France as well, and so on and so forth, you're asked to swear on a Bible or its equivalent, Quran, or if you're not into a religious thing, you promise to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, and that sort of stuff. So the word swear has this very long and I guess you could call it deep resonance. The other thing is, when I was a kid, I don't know about when you were a kid, you were told never to swear. And your mother would wash your mouth out with soap and water. At least the other Australian kids were told that. My parents didn't do stuff like that. But swearing is bad. And you wouldn't believe it today listening to kids talk, right? But there was a time when the word fuck or whatever it was a very bad word. And, you would get into trouble for what we call swearing. And this is almost like a footnote, but it's something to sort of trigger your thought processes. How can you have the same word swear, which is like this solemn thing, like in a court of law, for example, and at the same time it can be a curse, and cursing is the same thing as bad language, saying fuck a million times in a sentence or whatever it might be, and you've got this, what Freud called, what did he call it, the sort of double sense of these sorts of words, that they sort of have this, I guess, positive and negative pole to them. He has a delightful little essay. My mind is sharp, but I'll get the title forward. But it's basically about the ambivalent or double opposed sense of certain sorts of words. And so when a text is called I swear I saw this, or when I end the text in the way I just did, don't we all have such a prayer? It's to sort of bring to the surface, bring to consciousness the medley of things, the salad of ideas, if you like, that I just spent some time gesturing towards. And in the afterthoughts, I do a lot of things, and I tried to express some of them to Murray at the beginning of today's talks. I started off by saying that one of the things I wanted to do sort of write, and I wanted to combine that with what is a notebook. So the study of a drawing as opposed to writing is actually a smaller part of the question, what is a notebook and how do you think about notebooks and so forth. And I had started off by saying, wouldn't it be interesting to think of notebooks as a form of modernist literature? So we sort of come back to full circle, and I talk about the afterthoughts of what I call the notes. You suddenly feel impelled to write in your fieldwork diary a few hours or days after the diary entry. Naturally, I'm talking of handwriting, an ancient technology that allows the pen to slide away from forming letters and words to form pictures and back again to words. You start in the margin next to the relevant entry and end up God knows where, like right here. So that's an interesting form of presencing, like right here at the end of a book about drawings and fieldwork notebooks, namely my own. And I sort of speculate a little bit here. Say, afterthoughts often seem the most important aspect about an event that for some reason hadn't occurred to you in writing because of writing. That hadn't occurred to you of writing because of writing. Another manifestation of the mystic writing pad hitched to Barth's phantom. Such retrieval is irritating. Why does it have to be this way? Why can't things be more straightforward? What gives with this crazy montage? I was going to say marriage. Have a lot of problems with marriage. What gives with this crazy montage? I was going to say marriage, combining writing and thoughts that surge later, much later. Why is it that the uninscribed, the not written, if you like, requires the banal everyday to be set down, until that time when afterthoughts fly in like sparrows in the late afternoon? And now I see how strange this whole discussion, this whole potential book has become. As I pondered the drawing of the people in the freeway, I came to realize that this book would be about witnessing, about seeing as witnessing in relation to field notes, and that the book itself needed to parallel the notebook. I don't know what Brian and Aaron are talking about, but one of the things that occurs to me is this notion of radical empiricism, trying to get away, like following the Nietzsche thing. I guess it's a Deleuze thing. Trying to put reality in another register, in this case writing, and thinking about field notes in this regard, and the drawings in field notes. I came to realize that this book would be about seeing as witnessing in relation to field notes, and that the book itself needed to parallel the notebook, to share its chronology, beginning with the shot of the freeway tunnel in Medellin, and ending in a village surrounded by guerrilla in the jungle of the Pacific coast, where an old healer is demonstrating to me the art of healing espanto, an illness affecting young children, of whom I now see I must be one. That seemed to me a terrible admission. I mean, I put myself in the realm of a small child who's got espanto. So these are crazy things. You might regard them as very narcissistic and egocentric. But I also think this is part of the truth of what goes into a piece of writing, that it's finally got so much to do with the perceiver, with yourself. And it actually readers like that. They want that. It's a way that they can relate to things beyond the perceiver, through the perceiver. And so if I come out with this incredible statement through Christopher Bracken, who read this and said, he's really talking about himself. He's really identifying with this person here, if it is a man, which is often a phrase used here, to express the uncertainty of it all. And in this statement here, I'm thinking, well, aren't we all like that little child that Don Lucia is trying to heal? That we've all forms of Espanto, treating it more metaphorically and more generally, that we've all got these visions of the spirits of the dead, if you like. But of course, in our language, in our quote-unquote, our culture, if you, quote-unquote, that language is not going to be very familiar. It'll be helpful, but only up to a certain point. But it's interesting, it's very interesting, I think, because it opens your eyes to aspects of experience which you mightn't easily have accessed before. It's not seen as the whole truth and so forth, but it's a sudden illumination. You do it different. Everybody has a different way of doing it. And I wanted to talk about the ending. Go on.
Okay. This just reminded me of something in Aaron and Brian's class when they were talking to post-traumatic stress and how it the chronology is disrupted and how there's like this almost like indecipherability between the past and the future and the present moment, and how like there is this kind of truth in that gap. But I didn't really have anything specific to say about that, but it was just like looking at the really, really like micro level of like perceptive experience.
Yeah, I was thinking that, listening to him, the comments I had in conversation as well. I don't know if I've actually got much more to say, because to do justice to this afterthought would be a long discussion. First of all, the exegesis, you know the term? The saying what's in here, in other words, running through a description of these 12 pages would take a long time, and it might be better just to shadow off here. I'll draw attention to maybe a few things that I've got here in note form. First of all, that I wanted this notebook to surface, not only I wanted it to be obvious to the reader that there was like two planes, a bit like the talk last night, self and other, the minimal difference and so forth. My ending, the one with Don Lucia, was initially pure caprice, which takes us back to the place of chance, the place of chance and fate, chance, fate and sorcery, chance and fate in scrapbooks, chance and fate in Benjamin's essay on the collector, which is the collection being a magic encyclopedia, etc., etc. These are ideas which you take with a grain of salt. They're fun things for you to have that you can expand in ways that suit you, okay? They're great ideas. They need, according to who you are, more refinement and fitting into your issue. I'm just sort of vomiting them out. That ending was initially caprice. Out of the blue it came at me as something that seemed just right. The tone and the feel, as much as anything else. I saw it as a reprieve, writing those last 3 pages with Don Lucia and Gustavo and so forth. Lydia's blue embroidered bed cover. I saw it as a reprieve, a slow letting go, a slow farewell to writing a book. Bye, book. Slipping into the dugout. Just think of the expression, dug out. Slipping into the dugout canoe. Slipping downstream in the early morning mist. I wanted an aura of facticity. And I think that's an interesting expression, because you think aura is mystical and all that sort of hokey stuff, and you think of facts as the opposite. But here's an expression: I wanted an aura of facticity to rise at the end of the book, like that rising mist off the river, and even more than the aura of facticity, I wanted the book to mirror what I now call the staggered realism of a notebook, jumping from one apparently unrelated incident to the next, like a butterfly flying drunkenly from one flower to the next. Because that's what a notebook is like. It's like a butterfly jumping from one flower to the next. The facticity was meant to convey the grit and grain of note-taking as raw description, which of course is never all that raw, but has at least a hint of poetry reaching out to the mystery of the great unknown. facticity with its motley array of things, like the interior of a dresser drawer. And that was something I got from the letter Burroughs wrote to Allen Ginsberg when he was thinking about putting all together the thousands of pages he'd written in his heroin-addicted states and so on and so forth in all these places, New York, Panama, Colombia, Peru, Tangier, and then finally going to Europe in '59. And he said to Allen Ginsberg, this book we might put together, it's like opening a drawer in a hotel room or your drawer in your bedroom. And there's all these different things there, old theatre tickets, love letters, needle and thread, etc., etc. And Burroughs said that's what this book is going to be like. It's going to be like opening a drawer and you've got this weird stuff in there. Excuse me. The raw facticity with its motley array of things like the interior of a dresser drawer, for example, William's store, his shop, Dongping, and Gustavo's chickens, and there were several other bits and pieces, was my underhand, sneaky way of saying, look, here is the notebook once again, emerging from the shadows of this complex battalion stuff, whatever it might be. Here's the notebook once again, emerging from the shadows, if only for an instant, taking its curtain call. It is partly by design I did this, but also by chance, which we talked about yesterday, mirroring the role of chance in fieldwork, but here applied to writing, which is why I want to insist on the correspondence between fieldwork and writing work, which in this instance at least also provides a rather nice example of the cutout principle, with all the magic that implied for Brian Gyson and William Burroughs. That led me to a discussion of the place of montage and cutouts, the possibility of writing a sorcery text, my interest in the spell that was cast on Brian Gyson that I've described in the first half of today, all sorts of wonderful things that come to the surface in this afterthoughts. Then a description of how my own notebooks, and you could do the same for yours, I'm sure, developed over the years. And there's a sort of a narrative as to how those notebooks changed. I wanted to say how I went, I described a little bit how I went to Colombia from London. A group of us went to different parts of the world, and we were full of romantic and perceptions and conceptions, and how I thought I'd use my medical skills as part of a guerrilla grouping and so forth. And I've talked about the Soyal with this, and I'm sort of shamefaced, and it sounds so silly, and young people are like that, And the 1960s was like that very much. It was felt like a world revolutionary movement with the civil rights movement in the United States, followed by the anti-Vietnam War upheavals. 1968 in Paris, of course, is the iconic Eurocentric moment to designate that moment in history, and the upsurge or reintroduction of feminism in the late 60s in those texts, for example, by Germaine Greer and so forth, poet in Barnard in New York, forget her name, and the entire change in sensibility with clothes and drugs and music, and we're feeling a lot of people that they put their lives on the line, which is happening again to young people who are living great poverty throughout the south, whether it's in Iran, or whether it's in South Africa, or whether it's in a small country town in Colombia. It seems to me that there's a time live life in the fast lane, court danger, take risks, that the world that's being offered to you is not worth living at all, that you're not going to live like your mother and father did, digging ditches or working as a servant in the house. The gang formations that I described in Colombia is one instance of this, extremely widespread, I think, throughout especially the third world. It's another example of a completely different socio-economic class of people. And now, of course, I think there's a feeling of desperation in the first world as well, especially I think in the United States, which will grow stronger and stronger as this sort of apocalyptic economy and international political situation takes firmer and firmer hold. The battalion thing is interesting here, I think, because it sort of defies the normal cause and effect analysis that people live in the fast lane, as I call it. They live in the world of excess. Go for it. Because of deprivation. You know, if only they had a nice school to go to and this and that, things would be, that's the liberal view, things would not be like they are. But it seems to me that what's being picked on is this other thirst for exuberance, no matter what the cost, no matter what danger, no matter what cruelty, self-destruction and other destruction is involved. So the notebooks, it seems to me, my own notebooks reflect that beginning point and end point. And talking in terms of strict, more sedate or prosaic categories, I just wanted to make the point that when I started work, seems very sensible, I divided everything I saw into 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 categories: the church, land tenure, history, whatever. And then each category got subdivided, and I kept them in files, and I had cardboard boxes, and so on. And then I gradually gave this up for a diary that I found the inner world, this inner world and the outer world would all come on the same page. Tuesday, January the 17th. This happened, that happened, I thought this, I thought that. Replacing the categorical system. So it sounds simple, sort of obvious, but in terms of the intuitive understanding I had of what fieldwork is, it was certainly a shift. And I described to you guys before how weird fieldwork is, because no one ever teaches you how to do fieldwork. You get thrown in the deep end and you're meant to work it out yourself, which is one of the most puzzling and fascinating aspects of all this. So you move from the strict categories of the outside world to a form which is a diary-like fieldwork in which your inner world and the outer world are sort of all on the same page. And that's when the drawings, and that's when the afterthoughts and the afterthoughts chasing afterthoughts, as I described and we talked about in this book, came forth. That was, I've described to you the political economy of the sugarcane area. I've described to you the fieldwork about the so-called shamans. Shaman's a term I really do not like using. We can go into that in a minute if you like. And the taking of hallucinogenic drug over a long period of time, like 25 years, 1970s to the mid-90s, and how that, of course, acted as yeast to that process that was already underway, and a prolific interest or sensitivity to the world of sorcery, which is not often spoken about when people talk about magic and religion and stuff like that. My own understanding is that sorcery is, in fact, the major form of religion and magic in the world, and has been for a long time. And that's why it's worth thinking. And that's why that little story about Brian Garson, the super interesting white guy from Britain, Canada, French-speaking guy, when he gets gets this hold of the sorcery packet in the club, 1001 Nights, and he has to, it's very effective. I like that story. I use it as a sort of iconic moment in my presentation here. So that was very, very crucial to me. The sort of story I just told this in the first half about the grandmother and the two little girls. Can you imagine? I mean, living in that sort of world after a while, I mean, it gets to you. And then you have to go back to, the rational, liberal middle class, where you came from. And how do you adjudicate? How do you mediate that sort of knowledge? How do you talk about Nietzsche? How do you talk about Heidegger? How do you talk about Virginia Woolf or Laureate or whoever, given these other sorts of understandings? I mean, it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of anguish. It sort of can't be done. And then I wanted to talk about there's a different plane at which this worked, because I was going through a lot of, I think it gets too personal here. I mean, I was going through a lot of strife around 1980, 83, and I remember listening to my friend Rahina Karabali. Karabali's a slave name that comes from the west coast of Africa, talking to me one day about something, and it suddenly hit me like a ton of bricks, given what I was thinking myself about how the world is constructed with so many different points of view, like a cubist painting presents many different perspectives in the one diagram. And I call it multiple realities. And I don't know, you people are probably much more sophisticated than I was, but this to me was a tremendous discovery. Whoa, see, so what sort of square person I was, or how, because I was trying to do this sort of more rational scientific thing, and then suddenly I realized, talking to Rahina, that the world had all these different things going on, and points of view happening at the same time, and for some reason or other, I started to ask people about the saints in a particular town called Caloto, and there's a famous what is it, the Virgin? Yeah, La Virgen de Caloto. And where did she come from? And, where did she come from? So this person gives me an answer. This person gives me a completely different answer. This person, they all live in the same town, village, gives me a completely different answer. This person repeats the first person. That one has another one. And I started to at first say, oh, I know what I've got to do. I've got to poll everybody in the village, and I'll find out what is the commonest account, and then that's what you do in social analysis. You look for the major point of view, the minor point of view, you take the median, whatever. Okay, but then I thought, not really. Reality, anybody's particular reality, is going to be made up of all these intersecting possibilities. Well, that to me was revelatory. The other thing was corpses started to appear around the town that I lived in, and I wasn't, of course I was interested, but I wasn't studying it. But then someone would say, oh, this is due to the mafia, and because of this, and the person's eyes have been sewn up, and their señales, their fingerprints have been erased and stuff. And everybody has a different description of the corpse. Everybody has a different explanation of why they've been dumped outside the town. So I thought, well, shit, this is the same thing as I found out with the saints. There's all this multiple realities. So a lot of what I'm talking about comes out of the intersection of these various forms that appear in the sense of reality that comes out in the notebooks. And that's what led to my final sort of interest in this, where I use the image of the checkpoints. Where I say, my basic assumption that society was built on pretty substantial blocks of agreement about what was going on was being threatened. It was very different to what I was hearing back in the university. And here's where Burroughs' collages and approach to reality as cut up helped me a lot. In his experiments, along with Geisen and so forth, With the scrapbook and sound poem techniques, Burroughs provided me with a method of working philosophy that mirrored the cut-up reality I was living, not only in Colombia but in my life, in adhering to a dateline as with a diary, in juxtaposing, but not supplanting, order with disorder, text with image, what I construed as a scrapbook, picked up on strange trails of memory and layered afterthoughts that in mimicking the push and pull of reality, had a fighting chance of outwitting what I came to call the nervous system, by which I meant reality as a state of emergency. And all along I had an image in mind. I was thinking of what it was like when you approached a military checkpoint on a road through mountain passes of the Andes down to Macor, the town where I hung out with these curers. And I go into the metaphor, the checkpoint, as a sort of a metaphor, where you're never certain of what is going to happen to you. Whether you're going to get picked up or allowed through. What is the relationship of rule to absence of rules, and how you sort of try and figure out the system before the system has figured out you. And of course, it's a nervous system, not it's not a predictable system. It is not a system. These are images that I'm throwing at you right now. It was the same experience trying in vain to get a visa into Venezuela on the border with Colombia, on the Guajira Peninsula, east of Rio Hacha, pillaged by Drake in 1596, where he was looking for pearls and gold. Through the slit in the dark glass, all you could see was a mobile Bolivarian moustache, like some undersea clam opening and closing on its prey, while this bastard decides whether he's going to, come through with or without a bribe, and whether he likes the look of you, and you've got no idea what is going on. It's like when Benjamin in his essay, The Critique of Violence, says there's law, but then there's the application of the law. And that's why the police, he says, in a democracy, even in a democracy, but especially in a democracy, have this completely ambiguous role to play, because they apply the law, like in New York, with this rule of frisk, where you can stop and frisk people just merely because, well, basically because they've got a dark skin or they look weird, and in the outside boroughs of New York, the stop and frisk rate will be in the thousands, and the stop and frisk rate, of course, on the Upper East Side will be close to zero. And there's a huge hullabaloo because the police and the mayor of New York want to keep all this data on the computer intact on all these stop and frisk things, whereas liberal groups are saying you've got to expunge all this material. What I'm trying to get at here is the role of police and policing occupies this sort of flim-flam nervous system situation. The laws may be clear, and if you've got enough money, you can get a lawyer to represent you in terms of those laws, but the actual practice of day-to-day policing is a completely different state of affairs. And that's where Benjamin, in that unreadable essay, The Critique of Violence, and it's really a hard read, he makes a big deal out of that, and he even goes so far, this young anarchist, mystic, smart, overly intellectualized guy, we all love him, love Walter. He says the police in a democracy have this ghostly presence in the democracy. And this may go back to Zoa's thing about the difference between living in a black and white situation and a situation of shifting greys. Because he says in a democracy the police appear as ghosts. But that's just by the side. The whole point of power is its ability to change not only the rules midstream, but radically alter the aesthetic of flows and rhythms. This one learns, this you learn early in life, but hold at arm's length is too scary or too complex, so that you allow the great tropes of order to hold sway, whether in religion and ritual, as the move from disorder to order, or in the arc completed by narrative. So, finalising, finishing, I say, the close scrutiny of any situation teaches you otherwise, that when you were a kid, you were right. That the nervous system aesthetic underlies all of life, and not just its early perceptions. I attributed agency to the nervous system. I understood it as possessed of a will and a mind of its own. The moment you recognize the indeterminacy, which is the favourite trope of postmodernism, the moment you recognize that indeterminacy was the rule of the game, the damn thing, the nervous system, would snap back at you and proclaim order as regnant. And the moment you went the other direction, aha, now I get it, order, structure, hierarchy, all those great things, that's what I should be after, then it would revert to its earlier position, leaving you floundering. It is as if the nervous system can sense your moves before they happen. The point then is to figure out a craft. Remember, I put up the word craft right at the beginning of this seminar. The point then is to figure out a craft, how to get the jump on such a demonic reality that preemptively twists and turns in response to your attempts to get a hold of it before it gets a hold of you. That is why I like the idea of field notes with their afterthoughts, chasing first thoughts, then second thoughts, ad infinitum, through the sieve of derealization that writing creates. In a cascade of scribbles, no nervous system can confront while you tug at the phantom in the guise of a drawing refuses to give the nervous system its fix. So I hope this has been of some use. It's more like the raving of a wannabe poet. It's probably something that will be good to think with for your own work. I certainly hope so. And I hope I see you again sometime in the near future. I guess I'll see you in an hour's time.
Thank you.
What are you presenting tonight?
What am I what?
What are you presenting? What are you talking about tonight?
Oh, you don't want to put a hex on it. No, I'm not saying it. I'm not saying nothing. It's strange. I mean, coming here, I had a sort of vague idea about the role of philosophy, the importance of fundamental philosophy, and so forth. And I've read a fair share of that. But what's different is this thing of fieldwork and immersing yourself in another system and another community for a long period of time, which is what you're doing. And it can shake you around and give you not only other perspective or other takes, but most importantly, I think it gives you an urgency to this type of communication. And I think you've sort of seen this relationship between storytelling and trying to feel that. I don't think it works all the time. It could be done in a more modest and calmer and more minute fashion. But then people have been in this seminar, I've seen some of the smaller stuff, like the Sunsets Take You Back and the Corn Wolf. So anyway, if I talk anymore, it'll be another checkpoint.